This is Secret Stories, and my name is Mary Kachapalia. Many people cannot be on camera because their employer, their family, their friends, their church or synagogue would roll their eyes, ridicule, misunderstand, or even fire them. Secret Stories allow you to tell your story with anonymity. Here, I read experiencers' accounts commented on YouTube and emailed to us at Breaking the Silence. This is an account of a family member of an experiencer who also has a need for anonymity. Okay, so I have to be a little careful talking about this. I tried to open up about this a few years ago and ended up getting into a bit of a situation. So I'm trying to be extremely careful as to whom I talk to. Once I get into what I'm about to say, maybe you'll understand a little. Understand why I have to be safe. Some years back, I got a bunch of boxes left from my grandfather's things, and everything was just stored. One day, I decided to see what everything was. First off, let me begin with a bit of a backstory. My Gramps was in the Army a long time ago in the 40s. He was moved around a few times from base to base, like a lot of guys were. My Gramps kept a journal throughout his life. I had no clue until I went through his stuff. I believe it was about 1946 that he was stationed in Roswell, New Mexico. Sometime until late 1947 and into early 1958, if I recall that correctly. I dug out his journals because I was curious as to about what he might have written. I really didn't get to know my Gramps as well as I would have liked in my life, and I figured this was a great way to get to know him. He really liked to write, I discovered, because he tended to get into some detail in his journals. All of the journals had the dates on the covers, so I grabbed random ones and started reading. He wrote a lot about his job, what he did from day to day, and some of the things he either had worked on or had some knowledge about. After digging through them, I noticed that 2 of the journals were missing, one from late 1946 and both notebooks from 1947. I thought maybe they had gotten lost or misplaced. He wrote 2 notebooks a year, one for the first 6 months and another for the second. I looked through everything I had and could never find them or what happened to them. My grandmother was already gone, and I really didn't have anyone else in the family to ask, so I just kind of moved on from them. One day, a bunch of months later, I was digging around in his old garage and I found a safe which I had no way to open. I looked all through his papers looking for any clue as to what the combination was, but didn't have any luck. It was a really old safe and I didn't want to just destroy it to find out what was inside, so I moved on again. One day I got really lucky. I was reading another of his journals where he was writing about secrets and what it takes to keep them and the length some people will go just to keep them. I noticed these numbers, which I believed to be just some random chicken scratch, like maybe he just grabbed something quick to write on, for whatever reason. I read this one journal entry where he was writing about how he was worried about his journals not ever being seen, and he talked about that safe and how he had to hide something away, which he was kidding because he even hid the safe in a place where it was very hard to get to. He then talked about the numbers on the pages I had seen, and he wrote how those numbers were the key to unlock the safe. He didn't just come right out saying that it was. He wrote in a rather cryptic way. In the end, the numbers did indeed unlock that safe. In the safe, not only did I find the missing journals, but I also found some other papers with a bunch of names and numbers on them, with some of the names being scratched off with dates next to them. He also had 2 taped bundles of $10 bills, which I wasn't sure at all why he'd hide money like that. I could tell that the safe had not been opened in years. I grabbed the journals that I found, and later that night I sat down to read them. The one from 1946 is a bit hard to read. His handwriting seemed rushed, and a lot of the dates here and there, so I just set that one aside and started reading the ones from 1947. The first 6 months, his handwriting was a bit better than the previous journal. He mainly wrote about being in New Mexico, the heat, and his job. I flipped through until I noticed that the entry for July 1947 was thicker than any of the other entries. Gramps wrote about how one day he was called up to some office and there was a general and a few other brass there, but he didn't mention any names. He wrote about how they were sending him out with a team of others to do a search mission and that they were sending them out the next day, how they were to keep quiet and just do their job. He wrote about how he had noticed that there were a lot more going on at the base than normal. The amount of brass at the base and how they had never seen anything like that. He assumed it all had something to do with whatever they were being sent out for. He had been told to keep his mouth shut, so he wrote about not asking too many questions or talking about it with anyone else, because back then, in that day, when your government asked you to shut up, then you did exactly that and you kept your mouth shut. The next entry started off fairly normal. I guess you can say that the more I read, the more I was glued to the pages. He wrote about how a bunch of guys and he got into different trucks and headed off to complete whatever it was they were supposed to be doing. He said that when they got near the area, they all had to get out of the trucks for a briefing. After that, they were led down what my Gramps refers to as the scrub, which I took to mean the desert brush or something like that, till they came on what he looked to be a downed plane. He wrote about how there was debris so far out from the main site. He described the site as being guarded fairly heavily for it being just a plane crash, with whatever he describes as science types, wandering about the area with meters and various other types of equipment. He made a small sketch on the paper of an oval-shaped thing that was tore up on one area a lot worse than the rest of it. He wrote that it obviously came from the sky and skidded a little distance, hitting a rock which put a big dent in it, and that some of the metal was ripped apart and shredded into jagged edges in some spots. It had a dull finish that almost looked like some metal or tin, but the pieces they were picking up were very light, lighter than anything he had ever seen or touched. He wrote that after being out there for about 6 hours, he noticed red spots on his arms and backs and legs that started to appear on his skin. Others started to complain about the same thing. At first, they chalked it up to the heat or the dust until a few of the men started to get really sick. Some were throwing up, and some got the red spots in bigger patches than others. They finished up late that day, past dark, and were all sent to get looked at. Once back at the base, the red spots started to go away, and the men started to feel better. They had a long debriefing and were told over and over again not to talk to anyone or ever talk about what they had experienced. The next morning, he was sent out again for the day. When he got to the site, he noticed they had dragged the hull and were hauling it from where it had been the day before, and that they were getting ready to lift it onto a truck to take it away. He wrote that there was more science guys at the site, except this time everyone that were in and around the hull were wearing more protective clothing and that they were making all the men working the site wear thick gloves and long sleeves. And this time they were picking up debris, putting everything in these canvas sacks and then putting everything in boxes that were nailed shut at the site. Later that night, when they got back to base, Gramps noticed even more things going on with people. Trucks were coming and going to and from the base. They were using one of the hangars to put all the boxes and stuff in. There were guards posted all over the place. He talked about how odd everything felt with all the increased activity at the base. Later, he goes on and writes about the newspaper articles that flat out admitted to having an alien saucer, and he thought maybe they were going to tell and share it with the whole world until the next day's newspaper, where they absolutely retracted everything they had admitted to the previous day. He says that he was fully sure about everything he had seen and experienced. He wrote about how they claimed it was a weather balloon, and he mentioned that he was pulled into an office where they interrogated him about things he had seen or things he touched, and he said how he felt odd about how they kept saying weather balloon over and over, like they were trying to convince him that's exactly what was out there, that he was cleaning up, and how he had thought otherwise. He went on for many paragraphs writing about it, all to the point of his repeating himself a few times. I could tell in his writing that he was nervous and a little worried about it all. He talked about how when he was out at the site, about how the hull looked like a strange airplane with no wings anywhere on it. He wrote about how light the material was and how, when it crashed, that it had been going fast because of what it did to the area when it hit, and how it had dug a trench as it skidded to a stop. You could tell Gramps was writing in kind of a hurry, or like he was excited or something, and that the more he wrote, the more he was nervous about anyone finding out about his journals. He said he was taking a chance to write everything down for a record, and that it gave him an outlet to talk about it because he was very concerned about ever bringing it up to anyone who might get him in trouble or whatever, but he felt that he needed to write about it all. He mentioned that someone on the base or in his unit was in a lot of trouble because the word got out that this man had tried talking to a newspaper or radio station. Gramps wasn't exactly sure, but he wrote about this man getting into trouble over it. He wrote about how this man that he knew was just gone one day. No one could give my Gramps any information as to where his friend was. All they kept telling him was that the man got transferred, and no one said where. That's when Gramps decided to hide his journals and hide the safe and keep his mouth shut. Gramps wrote about how keeping that big secret aided him the rest of his life. He wrote how he paid attention to people over the years who had tried to talk about it all, and how these people ended up either gone or made to look crazy. He wrote that the only person he had ever said anything to was his wife, my Gram, and how nervous he was about telling her all about it. Gramps wrote that every time the story would pop up, either in the news or on some show, that maybe he'd finally be able to talk about it. He wrote how he never felt at ease enough to trust that nothing would happen if he decided to talk. Now that I've read his journals, I understand why he was so scared to talk about it. The month after he died, someone showed up at his house claiming to be military. They asked my mom about my Gramps' journals, saying that they knew he kept them and they wanted to see them. My mom told them he did indeed keep a journal, but they had gone missing because my Gramps moved a lot. The very next day, my mom shows up to go back to cleaning. Gramps' house was totally busted into. Everything had been gone through and dumped all over the house. There was one box under the bed that did contain a few of his journals, and that was the one and only thing taken. Not long after that, my mom's house was broken into as well, and everything tossed about. It's pretty obvious who is looking for those journals, and I took precautions before I wrote this. I've tucked those journals away, just in case. As I said earlier, now you can see why I'm trying to be as sage about this as I can. I don't care about making money. I've been offered that before when I tried to tell this story, but I don't care about making money from this. I'm just not interested in that. What I am interested in is sharing this story and have hopes in meeting with or finding someone that I can fully trust before I ever share or let anyone see the journals. I'm not taking too many risks. I just want to hope to get this out, and I know what his journals mean, and I know that I can't just trust anyone. I'm reaching out to see what you think, and that's why I'm writing all this. Thanks for your time. This gentleman later told me I could put this account into Secret Stories. Well, we will definitely keep this secret for him. We know it's hard to keep this stuff bottled up. Secret Stories are your accounts. Thank you for sharing them with us. It takes guts to share your account, and when you feel ready, I will share your story for you. This is Mary Cachapalia. May love and light be with you.